My millionaire mother-in-law destroyed my wedding dress with scissors and wine, but I recorded everything without knowing. Then I played it at the wedding, and all 200 guests were left speechless. I'm 35 years old. I work for an airline. Well, I used to work as a flight attendant until they moved me to an administrative position about a year ago. And I need to tell this story because honestly, I still can't believe all of this actually happened. I'm married to Daniel, who's 26 years old, and is the sole heir to a pretty big shipping company. I mean, his family has money, a lot of money, the kind I'd never seen in my life before meeting him. We met like 4 years ago on a flight to London. He was traveling in first class, obviously, and I was working. And I don't know. There was immediate chemistry. We started talking and one thing led to another. We'd been dating for 3 years when he proposed to me, and it should have been the happiest moment of my life, right? But the thing is, his mother, Beatrice Prescott, has been an absolute nightmare from day one that we met. The first time Daniel took me to meet his parents, I was super nervous, because they live in this huge mansion on the outskirts of the city, and I come from a normal working-class family. My parents are good people, but we definitely don't swim in money. I remember we arrived and Beatrice looked me up and down with this face of total disgust, like she'd stepped on something unpleasant, and the first thing she said to me was, "So you're a flight attendant? How interesting. It must be convenient for Daniel to have discounts on flights." She didn't even shake my hand. Throughout that entire dinner, she asked me super condescending questions about my work, my education, my family, and every time I answered, she just smiled in that fake way and said things like, "Oh, how nice. How quaint." Daniel tried to defend me and change the subject, but she was relentless. His father basically didn't speak the whole night, just nodded at everything she said. After that first dinner, I thought maybe with time things would get better, that Beatrice just needed to get used to the idea of her son being with someone like me. But no, things only got worse. Every time we saw each other, she found some way to make me feel small. She commented on my clothes, on how I talked, on my table manners. Once she told me in front of her whole family at a Christmas dinner that it was a shame I hadn't had the opportunity to go to a decent university, that it really showed in the way I expressed myself. Daniel got furious and we left immediately, but the damage was already done. You know what I mean? Every encounter with her was like that. Pure hostility, barely disguised as maternal concern. The worst part is that she didn't just attack me directly, but also tried to sabotage our relationship in more subtle ways. She constantly told Daniel that I was only with him for his money, that a woman my age with a younger man could only be looking for financial security. Yeah, there's a 9-year age difference between us. So what? That doesn't mean anything. Daniel always told me about these conversations because he's super honest with me and never believed the things she said, but it still hurt to know that his own mother thought that about me. She also constantly tried to introduce him to other women, daughters of her rich friends, women of his same social class and appropriate age according to her standards, and it was so obvious what she was doing that it was almost pathetic. When Daniel proposed to me like a year and a half ago, I was happy but also terrified because I knew Beatrice was going to lose her mind. And boy, did she lose it. Literally 2 days after we announced the engagement, she showed up at our apartment because, yes, we were already living together at that point, and demanded to speak with me alone. Daniel refused, but I told him it was okay, that I could handle her. Huge mistake. As soon as he left the room, she looked at me with pure hatred and told me that if I really loved Daniel, I should let him go, that I was going to ruin his life, that he deserved someone better, someone on his level. She told me my job as a flight attendant was embarrassing, that what would people think when they found out the wife of the Prescott Company heir served drinks on airplanes. She demanded that I quit my job immediately, if I wanted to marry her son. That was basically the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Up until that moment, I'd tried to be kind. I'd tried to win her approval. But in that instant, I realized it was never going to happen, that she was never going to accept me no matter what I did. So I told her no, that I wasn't going to quit my job, that Daniel loved me exactly as I was, and that we were going to get married with or without her blessing. She turned red with fury and told me I'd see, that she'd make sure this didn't happen. When Daniel came back and I told him what had happened, he finally really confronted his mother, told her that if she couldn't respect me, then she wouldn't be welcome in our lives. She cried and played the victim, said Daniel was being manipulated by me, but he stood firm, and she left furious. After that, there were like 6 months of relative silence. She didn't contact us directly again, but according to Daniel's father, she was devastated, crying all the time, saying she'd lost her son. Part of me felt bad. I'm not going to lie, because despite everything, she was his mother. But Daniel constantly reminded me of all the horrible things she'd said and done to me, and I knew he was doing the right thing by setting boundaries. My own parents, Richard and Carol, basically told me the opposite. They thought I should make peace with Beatrice, that I should be the bigger person, that at the end of the day, she was my future husband's mother, and appearances mattered. My parents have always been obsessed with fitting in, with not making waves, and the idea of having problems with such a rich and powerful family made them super nervous. Well, fast forward to like 3 months ago, 1 week before the wedding. I'd been planning this wedding for over a year, every detail, and one of the most important things for me was my dress. I'd been working with this incredible designer, Emma Laurent, who's basically a friend of a friend, and who made me a completely custom dress. It was beautiful. I mean, it was the dress of my dreams. Handmade with French lace and thousands of tiny pearls sewn on. It had cost me a fortune. Well, Daniel paid for it, but still, it was a work of art. Emma delivered it to me a week before the wedding, and I was so excited that I took it home immediately to show Daniel. I got to the apartment and Daniel was working from home that day, and I was so happy I basically jumped on him screaming that he had to see the dress. But Daniel is super superstitious about these things, says it's bad luck to see the dress before the wedding, so he completely refused. I laughed and told him he was being ridiculous, but he didn't budge, so I took the dress up to our bedroom and hung it in the closet, still in its protective bag. I decided to take a quick shower because I'd been running around all day and was exhausted. This is where things get absolutely insane. I left my phone on the nightstand, like I always do, and went into the bathroom. I was in the shower maybe 15 minutes, and when I came out and walked into the bedroom, I literally froze. My dress was thrown on the floor, completely destroyed. It had been cut with scissors in multiple places, the lace was shredded, and there was red wine spilled all over the skirt. I couldn't process what I was seeing. My first thought was that someone had broken in to rob us, but nothing else was touched, just my dress. I started hyperventilating. My hands were shaking, and I screamed for Daniel. Daniel ran upstairs, and when he saw the dress, his face went white. We started checking the apartment, but everything else was normal. The doors were locked, the windows too. Nothing made sense. And then, and this is the craziest part, I picked up my phone to call the police and realized the voice recording app was open and had been recording this whole time. I didn't even remember opening it. It must have been an accident when I left the phone on the nightstand, but there it was, a 40-minute recording. I hit play with trembling hands. At first, you could only hear the sound of the shower water in the background, and then, after like 5 minutes, you hear the bedroom door opening. And then, I heard her voice. Beatrice's voice. She was talking to herself, muttering things like, "This bitch isn't going to ruin my son's life. I'm going to take care of this right now." You could hear the sound of a bag being opened, and then the unmistakable sound of scissors cutting fabric. She was breathing heavily, almost panting from the effort, and kept muttering horrible things about me, calling me a gold digger, a whore, trash. At one point, you hear the sound of liquid being poured, and she says out loud, "Let's see how pretty you. Look now. Stupid." Then you hear her footsteps leaving the room and the door closing. Everything was recorded. Daniel and I just sat there, in absolute shock, listening to the recording. I was crying, not just because of the dress, but because I couldn't believe someone hated me that much, that his own mother was capable of doing something like this. Daniel was furious in a way I'd never seen him before. His jaw was clenched, and his hands were in fists. He grabbed his phone and called his mother immediately. She answered with that sweet fake voice she always uses with him, and Daniel asked her directly, "Were you at our apartment today?" There was a long silence, and then she said, "Oh yes, honey. I stopped by to drop off a wedding gift, but no one was there, so I left it at the entrance." He asked her, "Did you go into our bedroom?" And she laughed nervously and said, "Of course not. Why would I do that? I left the gift and left." Daniel told her we had a recording of her destroying the wedding dress. Another long silence. And then she started screaming, saying that was impossible, that we were lying, that I had probably destroyed my own dress to make her look bad to Daniel. He told her the recording was clear, that it was her voice, that everything she'd done and said was documented. Beatrice started crying and saying this was a misunderstanding, that Daniel had to listen to her, that I was pulling him away from his family. Daniel simply told her, "I never want to see you again," hung up the call and blocked her from his phone. I was devastated about my dress, but in that moment, something changed in me. I looked at the remains of my dress, listened to that recording again, and realized this couldn't just end like this. Beatrice had spent years making my life impossible, humiliating me, trying to destroy my relationship with Daniel, and now she'd gone too far. And she thought she'd won, that she'd ruined my wedding. But the thing is, she didn't know I had proof. And in that, a moment I came up with a plan. I told Daniel not to call the police yet, that I had a better idea. He looked at me confused but trusted me, so he said okay. I took the remains of the dress, packed them carefully, and called Emma, the designer. I explained the whole situation and asked her if there was any way to fix the dress in less than a week. Emma was quiet for a moment and then said, "Give me 2 days to evaluate it. I'm not promising anything, but I'm going to try." I took the dress to her that same night, and Emma basically didn't sleep for the next 4 days working on it. Every piece of destroyed lace had to be replaced by hand, the missing pearls had to be sewn back on, and the wine stains were impossible to completely remove, so Emma had to redesign that section of the skirt. But she's a genius, and somehow she did it. While Emma worked on the dress, I acted like nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone else about what Beatrice had done, not even my parents. Daniel wanted to confront her publicly, but I asked him to wait, to trust me. Beatrice tried to call Daniel multiple times, but he had her blocked, so she started calling me. I didn't answer, but she left voicemails. Some crying and begging to talk to Daniel, others threatening to ruin the wedding if we didn't let her explain. I saved every message, every threat, as additional evidence. And the wedding day arrived, and I was so nervous I felt like I was going to throw up. Emma had delivered the repaired dress the night before, and it was perfect. I mean, you couldn't even tell it had been destroyed. In fact, it looked even better than before with the adjustments Emma had had to make. Daniel had no idea the dress had been repaired. He thought I'd had to buy something last minute. So when he saw me walking down the aisle in that dress, his face was absolute confusion, before transforming into admiration. But the face I really wanted to see was Beatrice's. She was sitting in the front row on the groom's family side. Because despite everything, Daniel's father had insisted she had to be invited. She was his mother after all. When I started walking down the aisle, I saw her face, and it was absolutely delicious. First confusion, then shock, then pure horror. She went pale, and I saw her urgently whisper something to Daniel's father, who just ignored her. I kept my face serene and kept walking as if nothing was wrong, but inside I was triumphant. She thought she'd destroyed my day, but there I was, in my perfect dress, marrying her son. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel and I exchanged vows and officially became husband and wife. The whole time I could see Beatrice in my peripheral vision. She looked like she was about to have an attack, constantly shaking her head, trying to understand how it was possible I was wearing that dress. The reception was in a huge ballroom. We had like 200 guests, all of Daniel's extended family, our friends, co-workers, basically everyone we knew. Now comes the part everyone was waiting for, I guess. After dinner came the time for speeches. Daniel's father spoke first, gave a super generic speech about marriage and family. Then Daniel's best man spoke, one of his best friends, and it was funny and emotional, and then I asked for the microphone. Daniel looked at me surprised, because we hadn't planned for me to give a speech. But I smiled at him and took the microphone anyway. I started by thanking everyone for coming, saying how happy I was to marry Daniel, all the normal things you'd say in a wedding speech. And then I said, "But before we continue with the celebration, there's something I need to share with all of you." I signaled to the DJ, and he connected my phone to the sound system. I told all the guests that a week before the wedding, something terrible had happened, that someone had entered our home and destroyed my wedding dress. I could see people murmuring, surprised, and Beatrice had gone rigid in her seat. Then I said, "Fortunately, we have a recording of the incident, and I'd like you all to hear it." And I hit play. The audio started playing through the ballroom speakers, super clear. First the sound of the door opening, then Beatrice's unmistakable voice muttering her insults toward me, the sound of scissors cutting my dress, her labored breathing, her saying I was a gold digger and a whore, the sound of wine being poured, and finally her voice saying, "Let's see how pretty you look now, stupid." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people in absolute shock. All eyes turned toward Beatrice, who had stood up and was completely white. I kept talking, said I wanted everyone to know exactly what kind of person my new mother-in-law was, that for years I'd endured her abuse and mistreatment in silence, but this had crossed a line. I thanked Emma for repairing my dress and said I hoped everyone enjoyed the rest of the night. Beatrice exploded. She started screaming from her table, calling me a bitch, a liar, a manipulator, saying I'd edited the recording, that this was a setup. She started walking toward me yelling, and her husband tried to stop her, but she broke free. Daniel stepped between us, and Beatrice yelled at him, saying I'd bewitched him, that he was being a fool, that I was going to destroy his life. Two of Daniel's cousins literally had to restrain her and drag her out of the ballroom while she kept screaming obscenities. It was an absolute spectacle. My parents found me immediately afterward, and they were furious with me. My mother asked me how I could do something like that I'd publicly humiliated Beatrice, that this was going to cause terrible problems in the family. My father agreed, saying I should have handled this privately, that making this kind of scene at my own wedding was inappropriate and that Daniel's family was never going to forgive me. I told them Beatrice had destroyed my wedding dress, that she'd been mistreating me for years, and that she deserved to be exposed. They basically said that didn't matter, that appearances and keeping the peace were more important. Honestly, I felt super disappointed in them, but I wasn't surprised. They've always been like that. Daniel, on the other hand, completely supported me. After Beatrice was removed from the ballroom, he took the microphone and told everyone he was so sorry for the scene, that he hadn't known I was going to do that, but he backed my decision 100%. He said his mother had been treating me horribly since we met, and what she'd done with the dress was unforgivable. He said he was cutting all contact with her and hoped his family would understand his decision. Some relatives nodded in support, others looked uncomfortable, but no one publicly defended her after hearing that recording. The rest of the reception was weird. Honestly, some people came to hug me and tell me I'd done the right thing, exposing her, that they too had suffered Beatrice's behavior for years. Other people avoided Daniel and me, probably thinking we'd taken things too far. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. I'd spent years trying to win that woman's approval, years enduring her insults and mistreatment, and I'd finally shown everyone who she really was. I felt light, like I'd taken a huge weight off my shoulders. The day after the wedding, while Daniel and I were packing for our honeymoon, Beatrice showed up at our apartment. Daniel had changed the locks after the dress incident so she couldn't get in, but she stayed outside ringing the doorbell and screaming. Finally, Daniel went down to talk to her. I stayed upstairs but could hear everything. She begged him to leave me, saying I'd publicly humiliated him, that I'd made her look like a crazy person, that no woman who really loved her son would do something like that. Daniel told her very calmly that what she'd done was infinitely worse, that she'd entered his home without permission and destroyed something that didn't belong to her, that she'd been abusing his wife for years, and that he'd heard with his own ears on that recording the horrible things she thought about me. He told her he never wanted to see her again, and not to try to contact us. The following days were chaotic. Most of Daniel's family, his uncles, aunts, cousins, all cut contact with Beatrice. Apparently, many of them had also been victims of her behavior over the years, and this had been the final straw. Daniel's father stayed with her, but even he admitted what she'd done was wrong. Beatrice started sending threatening text messages, saying she was going to disinherit Daniel if he didn't divorce me, that she was going to cut him from the family business, that she'd make sure we never had a cent of the Prescott fortune. Daniel basically told her to do whatever she wanted, that he had his own money from his work at the company, that we didn't need her inheritance, that he'd rather be poor than have to deal with her for the rest of his life. And she did it. She really did. She changed her will and completely cut Daniel out. All the fortune she had, which was considerable because it came from her own wealthy family independent of her husband's company, she left to charities and distant relatives. Daniel shrugged when we found out and said it was the best money he was never going to receive. What surprised me most was most people's reaction. My friends completely supported me, thought what I did was justified, and even epic. Daniel's family, as I said, mostly cut contact with Beatrice. Some even called us to apologize for not intervening before when they saw how she treated me. But my own parents remained upset with me, saying I'd created unnecessary drama, that now Daniel and I were isolated from part of his family because of me. I explained to them 1,000 times that Beatrice had started all this, that I'd only defended myself, but they didn't want to listen. About a month after the wedding, Daniel organized a small makeup reception celebration at our house. Invited only like 30 people, our closest friends and the relatives who had supported us. It was beautiful, super intimate and relaxed, no drama. Exactly what our original reception should have been before I played that recording. During that party, Daniel surprised me with tickets for a month-long honeymoon in Europe, something we'd had to postpone because of all the chaos. We visited Italy, France, Spain, and it was absolutely perfect. Now, like 6 months after all this, Daniel and I are doing well. Better than well, actually. Not having Beatrice in our lives has been incredibly liberating. Yes, there are moments when Daniel misses his mother, or rather misses the idea of having a mother who isn't toxic, but he says he never regrets his decision to cut her out of his life. She still tries to contact him occasionally through Daniel's father, sending messages about how she's sorry and wants to reconcile, but there are always conditions. It's always, I apologize if you divorce her. Or, we can fix this, if she apologizes publicly. Things like that. Daniel simply ignores everything. The shipping company still belongs to his father, and Daniel still works there. His father never cut him from the business despite Beatrice's pressure. In fact, his father eventually admitted that Beatrice had been out of control for years and that he'd been a coward for not confronting her sooner. I don't know if that counts as an apology, but it's something, I guess. As for me, I left my job at the airline not because Beatrice asked me to, but because I wanted to. I got a better paid administrative position that doesn't require me to be flying constantly, and honestly, I'm much happier. Daniel and I are considering starting a family soon, and the idea of having children without Beatrice in their lives is a huge relief. I don't want my kids to grow up around someone so toxic and manipulative. I know a lot of people think what I did was too much, that exposing Beatrice publicly at my own wedding was cruel or inappropriate. My parents certainly think so, and some acquaintances have also told me I should have handled things more privately. But honestly, after years of enduring her abuse, after she literally destroyed my wedding dress a week before my wedding, I think she deserved to be exposed. She was counting on me being too polite or too scared to confront her, that I'd just stay quiet and let her get away with it like she always had. Well, not this time. This time, she completely underestimated who she was trying to destroy. Sometimes I still think about her face when I started walking down that aisle in my perfectly repaired dress, the absolute shock in her eyes when she realized her plan had failed. And then her face when I hit play on that recording, and everyone in that ballroom heard exactly what kind of person she was. It was pure satisfaction. I'm not going to lie. After everything she put me through, I felt like I'd finally gotten back some power in that completely unbalanced relationship dynamic. Daniel tells me I'm the strongest person he knows, that he admires how I handled the whole situation with Beatrice. He says many people would have given up, would have walked away from the relationship because of all the drama with his mother. But I stayed and fought. And he's right. There were moments in the early years of our relationship when I considered ending it all, just so I wouldn't have to deal with Beatrice ever again. But I loved him too much, and I wasn't going to let her win. The thing is, in the end, she lost everything. She lost her son, she lost the respect of her extended family, she became the villain of her own story, and all because she couldn't accept that her son had chosen to love me. All because she felt I wasn't good enough for her old money family. Well, it turned out I was more than strong enough to face her when I finally decided to do it. And that recording, that fortunate accident of leaving my phone recording, was the perfect evidence I needed to show everyone who she really was behind that facade of refined and concerned lady. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. If Beatrice will eventually accept reality and stop trying to contact Daniel, or if she'll keep being bitter and vindictive until the end. Honestly, it's not my problem anymore. My life now is with Daniel, building our own future together, without his mother's toxicity poisoning every happy moment. And every time I look at our wedding photos, looking beautiful in that dress, Emma rebuilt with so much love and effort, I remind myself that I survived the worst Beatrice could throw at me and came out victorious. That's enough for me.